You better get moving, ready or not. It's got to go down. Here it comes now. Better get moving, ready or not.
It has been a wild season in college basketball. I'm Ben Colin here in the studios for KRUI 89.7. I've got Chase Hannen here with me for College Hoops Central.
How's it going, Ben? It's been a while. I'm happy to be back on the air.
It has been a while since we've really got to take a deep dive into college basketball. You know, this season was crazy. It's a weird one for the Hawkeyes. Give me one takeaway, first thing off your mind.
I didn't expect them to make the tournament, and they got a win in March. And they almost got a second win in March, too. I'm ecstatic with how the season went, and I'm only excited for what's going to come.
Things are going to be really good for the Hawkeyes here coming up. Well, let's get it started. We crowned a national champion on Monday. It was a first-timer. The Virginia Cavaliers beat Texas Tech in the national title game. It was a fantastic game. Went to overtime. Virginia and their talent, building off of that very disappointing loss last year, they were able to claim the national championship this year. So thoughts on that title game? A lot of people thought it was going to be a boring one. We had two defensive-heavy teams, but we really got a show.
Yeah, Vegas had the over-under, started at like 112. It pushed up a little bit, up to 118, but a lot of people did not think this would be an exciting game. Shades of perhaps UConn Butler in 2011, where the Final Four was the real treat and the championship game was a dud. This one really showed out. The Final Four as a whole showed out. I loved the four teams we got, and this championship, it really, really gave us all it could. Overtime in a national championship game where you've got two teams that have never won a ring before, that's all you can ask in March Madness.
And the very interesting thing about this, Virginia trailing late in all of their last three games in that tournament to Purdue as well as to Auburn, and then same thing with Texas Tech in the title game. This one, they were down 3 with 15 seconds left. That was probably the most time they had of this tournament to overcome a deficit, but three-point deficit hit a huge three to force overtime. What do you think is the key behind that resiliency for the Cavaliers?
I mean, Tony Bennett is at the front and center of any sort of anecdote that you can come up with these Virginia Cavaliers. I mean, we have talked about it time and time again. This is such a perfect, almost too efficient system in the regular season. Can it work in the postseason? Michigan State continually knocking them off in the tournament. Virginia finally gets that elusive 1 seed, immediately loses to a 16. The memes income immediately. It's just like Virginia cannot escape this reality that the regular season success does not pan over to the tournament. They finally got it. 3 games in a row. And even before those 3 games, they trailed by double digits to Gardner-Webb in the first round, another 16 seed. They just could not get that monkey off their back. Finally, Tony Bennett and his guys do it, and this has to mean the world to people like Ty Jerome, Kyle Guy, who are just thrown under the rug, thrown under the bus, really, for DeAndre Hunter being out last year. People kind of thought this team can't ball without DeAndre Hunter, and they showed out, Kyle Guy especially winning Final Four Player of the Year. It's a team that showed resiliency, like you said. I think that's the perfect word for it. They're deserving national champion.
And you mentioned Kyle Guy and DeAndre Hunter. Guy scoring 24 points in that championship game. Hunter with 27. He was the defensive player of the year in the country. A fantastic player and had a huge part in this. But Kyle Guy, we all saw the profile pictures leading into the tournament. The profile picture of head in his hands as UMBC celebrates in the background, changing it to a celebration afterwards. What do you think something like this means to a guy like that who had to go through such turmoil leading up to this?
Kyle Guy in the interview right after the game said the loss to UMBC was the best thing that could have happened to him, because he really took that into perspective, that getting that 1 seed, being one of the best regular season teams of all time, doesn't mean anything for a team like Virginia, or a team that has never won the national title before. They don't have anything to rely on, lean back on in program history. It has to mean the world to guys like him. It has to mean the world to Tony Bennett, that program in general, because they compete every single year in the ACC. They win the ACC, at least in recent memory, yet they just could not get over the hump. They finally do. It means the world, I would assume, to Kyle Guy and most certainly Tony Bennett.
Well, and you see that every year in the tournament. That's a great thing about March Madness is each team has that one guy that puts the team on their back and carries them to the promised land. And this year it was Kyle Guy, and especially in that Final Four game against Auburn, he was willing to take the shot and then had the pressure of shooting 3 free throws to win that game and advance to the championships. I want to look on the flip side quick of that title game. Texas Tech had some missed opportunities down the stretch. They played a phenomenal game, and I don't want to take anything away from Chris Beard and that group that he had, because it's a phenomenal story for them to make it there. But down the stretch, an opportunity to end the game in regulation with 1 second remaining, some missed opportunities in overtime. Do you think there's something they could have done different to win that game?
Absolutely. I mean, with what was it, 6 seconds left, even more in regulation, drive the lane, don't play hero ball and chuck up a three. I mean, I can be the 75-year-old radio guy that talks about, oh, all these young folks chucking up threes late game. They just want to be James Harden, Steph Curry. But that probably does have an effect here. You want to be the guy that wins your team a national championship with that amazing three. I mean, Villanova did it just 2 years ago. They literally passed it back when they could have drove the lane. They shot a deep three and it went in. That's one of the most iconic moments in college basketball history. They want that in Texas Tech, and it didn't fall there. Obviously, they had their chance right after that and could it put it in. They got all of overtime to try and get it, but it just slipped away from them. Yes, Texas Tech did have some stumbling points in the title game, but man, you just have to hand it to Beard and those guys. Texas Tech was picked 7th in the preseason poll for the Big 12. They make the Final Four and the national championship game, and they're one play away from winning it all. Hell of a year.
Well, I'll give a lot of credit to Chris Beard. A phenomenal coach, phenomenal story for him, working his way to this point. And I'm proud of him for staying at Texas Tech. He had there was obviously going to be an opportunity to go to UCLA. He could have been having those discussions behind the scenes during this Final Four when all the administrators are together. But to stay at Texas Tech, be committed to those guys, it shows a lot about the coach. And I think that's really going to boost Texas Tech's program.
Yeah, I'm really happy. I mean, if you're a Texas Tech fan, last year was the greatest year in program history. You make an Elite Eight, you see all of these great seniors go out on a high note, and Chris Beard, perhaps in his last year, like you said, there was a lot of outside noise. He could go somewhere. UCLA was a potential candidate, maybe even go to UConn or something like that, but those spots got filled, and he came back with a lot of young guys, and he got a couple of grad transfers. Those proved to be huge. Mooney was a player that really flew under the radar all season, even though here's the big storyline, they knocked off Kansas. Kansas has won, I don't know.
No one talked about it.
I don't know how many titles in a row, Big 12 titles. They shared it with Kansas State this year to win the Big 12, get the 3 seed, and man, they just rolled one heck of a tourney, and it really shows that it's a lot of coaching has to do with this. Once you get down to March, you had 2 of the best coaches in the country, Tony Bennett going up against Chris Beard.
2 young coaches that have a lot ahead of them in college basketball. Changing pace a little bit, we've talked a lot about the positives of this Final Four, but there's kind of the cloud hanging over what we had, and that was the officiating at the end of the game between Auburn versus Virginia. And Chase, what do you take away from that? There was obviously the foul called that led to the free throws. I think everyone can agree that was the right call.
Yes,
There's not a lot of people that are saying that call was wrong. It was a foul. He made contact. He's lucky it wasn't something worse. There were people that threw around should have been a flagrant because he got under his air. I think they made the right call, but we'll take a couple seconds back to the missed double dribble from Ty Jerome at midcourt. What's your takeaway from that?
The big takeaway for me was that until maybe 10 minutes after the game, no one was talking about it. Neither of the announcers, no one surrounding the team, not even Charles Barkley, who is the avid Auburn supporter there on the sideline, cared about the double dribble until it was pointed out by a couple people on Twitter. Like, yeah, that ball wasn't touched. It bounced off of his leg. They just missed a wide open double dribble there. I am in the camp that it was a missed foul before that double dribble. Jersey was pulled. You can obviously see it come off his body. That's a reach-in foul right away. It should have been, I don't know if they were in the bonus quite yet at that point, but it should have been at least a 1-and-1, which I kind of was of the opinion that they should foul right away.
Any foul anyway, yeah.
Because then they get to the line for either a 1-and-1 or 2 shots, and then they have only 6 seconds or whatever to try and score, but brilliantly done by Virginia to get through that resiliently. But yes, it was a missed double dribble. The foul call did come right after. I mean, for me, it's, yes, you can look at that. You have to go all the way back to the round of 64, where Auburn could have lost on the very same call, but New Mexico State went 1 for 3 on those final 3 free throws, and Auburn survived and advanced and made it all the way to the Final Four. I mean, that's the craziness of March. It brings me back to the miraculous Jordan Poole shot against Houston just last year. Michigan ran all the way to the title game, could have lost in the round of 32. It's the magic of March that really you can take a step back and you can kind of forget it once you get to April, that all that stuff in the round of 64 doesn't matter, but one slip of the shoe or one tug of the jersey makes all the difference.
So many things can happen throughout the course of March. I'm of the opinion that I don't like to criticize officials because they are human. And at the end, that's what Bruce Pearl said after the game, Auburn's head coach. They are human. They make mistakes. The thing that gets me, though, is the increase in late game, season-defining officiating misses. These things that aren't getting called, those are the things that is kind of peculiar to me right now, and I'm wondering why does this seem to be increasing. I don't like I said, I don't like to criticize the officials. I don't want to be sitting here and going, if the officials wouldn't have messed up here, here, and here, this game is totally different. But I look back to football in the playoffs this year with the missed call in the Saints-Rams, NFC title game. There's this increase in these type of instances. Would the game be different? Maybe, we don't know. Something very well could have happened differently.
It's the storyline of, do the refs swallow their whistle or not? Because if that is not a foul call, if the player did not actually get under Kyle Guy's feet and close out his air, like you said, and give him the 3 free throws, but they called it anyway, that's the big storyline.
Yeah.
But the ref was there, and he made the right call. In those tight scenarios, a lot of refs swallow their whistles,
and
just let them play.
anything.
I remember an infamous 2015 UNC Duke game where it was an obvious charge foul. He was set way before any guy got to the circle, but they just decided not to call it charge nor block, went up and scored, and that was the end of it. It was a regular season game that gave Duke the ACC title that year. For me, I'm proud of that ref, even though Auburn kind of gets screwed out of that win. It's the right call.
He made the right call.
Yeah, I'm glad that he made it.
Kind of changing pace now, and we talked about this a little bit in the case of Auburn and that foul that happened in the round of 64, but we highlighted a few games that we were pretty excited about when we were watching them during the tournament, early rounds in particular. What are some that stand out to you in addition to that Auburn-New Mexico State game?
I mean, my favorite, the one that just wasn't, was Duke over UCF. Taco Fall played one heck of a game in that one. You said it, or you were saying it before the show, just that late foul. And then after that, UCF did have a chance and just bounced off the rim a couple of times and ended up going out. Duke just barely survives there. They did end up losing 2 rounds later to the Spartans in the Elite Eight. Coach K could not get another Final Four on his resume, and those 3 studs from Duke are all most likely headed to the NBA. RJ Barrett just declared today. Yeah. You have to imagine Zion is gone.
I don't see any way he doesn't.
I was to say Reddish, it would make. There's a world where he could stay. I don't think it happens. I mean, I think it would be crazy to see the top 3 picks be Duke. I don't think that happens. I think Ja Morant probably goes number 3. And there's some other potential for other players sneaking there. But that UCF Duke game, a 1 versus a 9, you don't typically think of as an amazing game. The last one I can remember is Kansas getting knocked off by Northern Iowa.
Yeah,
Ali
Ali
Farokhmanesh. That was one of the best games just as a neutral. I mean, of course, Northern Iowa is in Iowa, so I have to root for them. But just a 9 over a 1 in any setting has to be exciting. For me, it's those 1 versus 8-9 games can tend to get out of hand early. And just the fact that it was close was exciting. But the fact that it came down to close to a buzzer beater that was just would not fall for UCF. That has to be one of the games of the tournament for me.
The superstar in that game, Zion Williamson, 32 points. I look at this matchup and the result of this game and what we saw with Taco Fall matched up against Zion Williamson as a key component to the way this tournament shaped out, because someone finally showed the nation how to beat Duke. They exposed the way you have to play against Zion Williamson. I don't think there is any doubt that Zion Williamson is the best player in the country this year. I would even go as far to make the claim that Zion Williamson is the best person to ever play college basketball. He is a phenomenal player that is very hard to beat Duke when he's on the floor. Taco Fall exposed the way to beat Duke. And I think the fact that this game is close, it drew a lot of eyes. People started paying attention to, okay, Duke's struggling now with UCF. What is the reason for this? I think it set Michigan State up very well with Nick Ward then to be able to do that same type of tactic that Taco Fall was using against Williamson, and Michigan State was able to pull off an upset.
I don't disagree with you. Zion's plus minus is out of this world. When he's on the floor, that is what Duke wants, obviously. I think UCF, not only did they exploit what you have to do to defend Zion, I think they just made RJ Barrett shoot. And he's going to put up 20 shots a game if you let him, but he's only going to make 8. He's only going to make 6, 7, 8. And while that is nice, if he can get into that 16 to 20 point range, it looks nice on the stat sheet. But when you're wasting all of those possessions on 18-foot jumpers from RJ Barrett, that's how you beat Duke. Mm-hmm. And UCF gave Michigan State the blueprint. They couldn't execute. They were so close to the upset of the century right there, but just could not fall. Michigan State, that blueprint fell right into their lap there. Yeah, and no disservice to Izzo there. I mean, he deserved making another Final Four. They deserved to make it back there. Obviously, just couldn't get it done against Texas Tech, and a pretty solid win for Chris Beard's squad over the Spartans. But a Big Ten team got to the Final Four, and no slight to them. They knocked off Duke, the favorites in pretty much everyone's bracket, including mine.
Speaking of other upsets, the only real major upset that we had throughout the entire course of this tournament was number 13 UC Irvine defeating number 4 Kansas State. I had a lot of fun watching this game. What is your takeaways from this? What stood out to you about the Anteaters from out west?
I would say the Anteaters stand out to me. That's the fantastic mascot. It has to be one of the best of the tournament.
It's not a very intimidating one, but except for ants, maybe.
If you push a bracket in front of someone who knows nothing about basketball, but they ask, usually what they ask is the colors or what the mascot is. If someone hears Anteaters and doesn't pick them, you're just kind of...
It's sad. You're
cutting your own bracket there. I mean, I actually did pick UC Irvine.
As did I.
I say, don't get me wrong. I also picked New Mexico State, Yale, a couple other ridiculous picks that didn't fall through. And yet, all those picks that I picked...
I had Wofford in the Final Four, so...
All right. I mean,
you know I love Fletcher McGee.
All of last year, you were just a year early on the Wofford train there. They did get to that 7 seed, just lost to Kentucky. For me, all of those upsets I picked, they covered but didn't win. And I was just, it was so close. But I clicked in on the UC Irvine one. I was happy to see it. I mean, it was pretty obvious with Wade out with Kansas State. It made sense that they were going to have an upper hand down low. I mean, every time that Wade was out all season, teams tended to dominate Kansas State, Iowa State notwithstanding. This was a great Kansas State team in the regular season that just could not get it done in the postseason, which is sad because last year they made that Elite Eight run. They made the Elite Eight because they knocked off Kansas State, knocked off UMBC. They had a pretty enjoyable run all the way to the Elite Eight, and
it's a bummer to not see them be able to turn that around.
Dean Wade coming back, Snead coming back, they just couldn't get right back, and they win the Big 12. It just seems like everything was pointed in the right direction, but unfortunately couldn't get it done. I'm happy to see the Anteaters there, and I mean, if you're looking for mid-majors next year, don't take them off your list.
They are absolutely, I was going to point that out. Their top 2 returning scorers are back. Max Hazard and Evan Leonard are both returning. They do lose their leading rebounder and Jonathan Galloway, but
who was a force in this game.
He absolutely was, but that's about it. That's really all for major contributors. They lose.
Yeah, they lose Cartwright, who's that grad transfer from Stanford. But I mean, he was their 5th minutes leader. Like he was a starter, he was their 6th man coming off the bench, but he was their 5th leading minutes getter. I still like this team. I mean,
as do I.
I would say there are other mid majors that jump off the page, but UC Irvine, it's the perfect mix of returning a lot of players, and you know they're going to get a grad transfer or two.
Out west, you're in a cool environment. Exactly. People are going to come there.
Yes, it tends to happen every year. Now, a lot of times I look at like Long Beach State or UC Davis or San Diego or something that I like to sneak in as an at-large, maybe win their tournament. But UC Irvine really showed out this year. They got that upset. I thought they might even beat Oregon, but then they kind of got run off the floor by a couple guys, Peyton Pritchard.
That was a hot Oregon team coming in this tournament, a lot of wins. And then speaking of UC Irvine, they went on a run through the end of their regular season, only had 5 losses coming into the tournament. Yeah. I think they're absolutely a team to look at for the future, playing out as a potential upside. Now, Lenardi in his way too early bracket, He's got them as a 15 seed. Yeah, so Lenardi's not looking at him very high. He has them playing Kentucky.
I was say if just this last year they were a 13 seed. So I mean, if you're losing a couple of those players, your conference certainly is not getting any better. Yes, they're going to be between a 13 and a 15. I don't think they fall quite that low. They could very well lose more than 5 games again, but I mean, hell, UMBC lost 13 games or something like that, and then knocked off Virginia. You just got to get hot at the right time. I think UC Irvine has the parts.
I'd be curious to see what their future basketball schedules look like, because they're not going to have a tough conference schedule. You're looking at a very weak conference. They're in the WAC, correct?
I think the WAC is New Mexico State and Grand Canyon.
You're right.
Big Sun, Big Sky, Big something. Big West?
I want to say, Big West sounds about right. Which then they do their tournament in Anaheim, I want to say.
You could be right. Yes, Big West is what it is.
I'd be curious to see. We will see UC Irvine again. I have no doubt in that. They're going to be back in the tournament next year, and probably contending for an upset. I just hope maybe they get lucky and get a little bit of a higher seed instead of a 15, like Lenardi is saying now. But speaking of next year and looking at that, we can kind of take a look at what Lenardi's got. He dropped his way too early bracketology, the 4 number 1 seeds that he's talking about. He's got Michigan State, Virginia, both returning Final Fours. He has them in his early 1 seeds. And then the Michigan Wolverines and the Duke Blue Devils. I don't know if I agree with his 1 lines.
2 ACCs and 2 Big Tens. Are you just expecting the SEC to fall off a cliff here? Are you expecting the Big 12 to fall off a cliff? I understand that the highest Big 12 seed was a 3. You also tossed one of them into the national title game. You tossed an SEC team into the Final Four that wasn't named Tennessee or Kentucky or LSU. These are teams that are all on the, at least either staying. I think Florida is on the up. I think Auburn can definitely stay there. Michigan at the 1 line is the one that jumps off the page to me. These other 3 ones I can absolutely understand. Duke and Michigan State, it makes sense. Michigan is taking a step back. I don't think they are the even second best in the Big Ten next year. I think Maryland is right up there with him. As a homer pick, I think Iowa can get a top 4 seed. I don't think they're better than Michigan, like a better team per se, but I genuinely don't think Michigan gets a 1 seed. I don't even think they get a 2 seed in this next tournament.
I don't look at Michigan in what they're returning as a team that can be at the level they were this year. I think that seed would be better off going to a team like Kentucky that's going to bring in a hot recruiting class. These guys are going to be talented. They already had a really good year this year, and Calipari always turns out a good squad. They're on the 2 line. I think they'd be better fit as a 1 right now. I don't know about Auburn. North Carolina is another one that could potentially be there.
I really like Bruce Pearl and Auburn. I don't know if they're getting back to the Final Four. I just think that 1-2 line is where they belong next year.
At least to start.
Tennessee is going to take a step back. They lose a lot. They lose Grant Williams. They lose Schofield. This is a team that we saw last year probably deserved to go even further, but they took a stumble with Iowa, just barely snuck out of overtime there and couldn't get past those teams. Couldn't get past Purdue.
It drained their energy.
Yes, I agree. When you're up 25 and you're forced to play an extra 5 minutes, where did that come from? For me, Tennessee is a great team that's probably going to take a step back. Likewise with Michigan. I think Lunardi's underestimating Gonzaga a bit. He's got them on this 3 line. I know they lose Rui Hachimura. This is a team that every single year is going to get one of the best recruits on the West Coast, bar none.
They're always able to reload.
Gonzaga's better than any Pac-12 team. You could take like the Pac-12 All-Star team, and I think that Gonzaga gives them a run for the money. Yeah.
You put a team together that includes probably Peyton Pritchard at the 1 from Oregon, and then you really kind of start to wonder, who do you build around him? There's your Pac-12 champ point guard. And
Trey Tinkle is off to the draft. He had a great year with Oregon State. He's gone. You'll probably get one of those 17 Arizona forwards that is I don't know if they're going to pan out or not, but it makes sense.
Maybe a guy off of Hurley's Arizona State team.
Oh, absolutely. Arizona State was an underrated team. They did get the doors blown off of them by Buffalo, but they at least beat St. John's in that first 4.
Yeah. Gonzaga's a good team. They're underestimated in this whole scheme. Looking at this bracket, it's always fun. Since we're just leaving the period of filling out brackets and frantically checking them through March Madness, I figured it'd be kind of fun to run through this. And who do you have in your Final Four out of this very early Joe Lunardi bracket?
Yeah, I'm always a proponent for athleticism. So Florida State is always going to be on my radar. This is the most athletic, probably the longest team in college basketball. Last year, they're just a joy to watch. They ran into Gonzaga 2 years ago and knocked them off and then made a run. I don't know if it was Elite 8 or Final 4. I believe it was Final 4 for Florida State. And then this year they ran into Gonzaga again and ended up losing. Florida State, he's got pitted up as a 5 seed, and they would face Purdue on the 4 line and then Duke on the 1 line. I think Florida State is higher than a 5, but in this zone, I think they make the Final 4 out of that little zone. I think they're my dark horse. Athleticism is always what I'm looking for. Florida State is going to get out of the West. Looking at the South, Michigan is far too high on that 1, so I could totally see them losing early, probably to that number 4 Kansas seed jumps off the page. Marquette at the 3 is just astounding to me. I don't understand how you can have them that high. I don't think they have the supporting cast to support a 3 line. Texas Tech, yet again, undervalued at a 7 seed. They're probably not going to get out of there, but I'd take Kentucky out of that bracket at the 2. Going out Midwest, Michigan State at the 1 and UNC at the 2. This is a pretty low bracket. Maryland is the 6. Villanova is the 3. I'd probably take Nova to get out of here. It is going to be an even year, so Nova has to win the national title. I'm going to take Nova getting out of there to make the Final 4. And then on the other side, he's got Iowa as a 3 seed. I think that's a bit high, even as a Hawkeye fan. I'd love to see Iowa up there. I just don't think they can make it out of this zone, especially if they have to face Houston, who's a 2 seed that I think could get back to those glory days. And honestly, if you've got Houston against Virginia, I'm going to take Virginia to get to the Final Four yet again. But man, that Houston team's going to be fun to watch next year.
So ours is very similar in terms of what we're thinking for our Final Four. Out of that Midwest region, I have Villanova as well because it seems like the even years, they just have to keep winning. I'm going this next year will be my 8th Final Four, and Villanova keeps winning on the evens, so I have to go with them. Out of the East region, I think we were very similar. Virginia, they return a bunch. I mean, based on Ty Jerome has a decision that he's going to need to make. Kyle Guy, I don't see any reason why he won't be back in school. DeAndre Hunter, I think there's a good shot he will declare and eventually leave.
He's the next Malcolm Brogdon.
Yeah.
I think he's that utility player that they rely on. If you don't have him, you lose to UMBC. If you do have him, you win the national title.
Absolutely.
Any NBA team would love to have him as a utility player.
And I think he's going to be gone. And that's kind of the general consensus around Minneapolis during the Final Four is that DeAndre Hunter is going to the draft. This is going to be his last college weekend of games here. But Virginia still has a ton of talent, and especially with the guards. And
perhaps the best coach in the country, just tactics
right now.
Yes.
And so I'm going Virginia. They're out of the East. From the South, I went with Kentucky. Like I talked earlier, Calipari always is able to reload. He's able to keep building these groups that he has. You know he's going to bring in a top recruiting class in there, even if it doesn't look like the recruiting classes that Duke is bringing in. These kids are talented. They're going to be able to play. And then in the West, we differ a little bit. Out West, on the West, I went with Duke out there. I think, again, Coach K always brings in these classes. They're going to have the number 1 recruiting class in the country when it's all said and done. Zion Williamson, RJ Barrett, they're gone, but we turn around and Duke's going to be the same team that they are, and especially after a disappointing loss. Granted, tournament losses sit a little bit more with the players than they do the coaches, but Coach K is that kind of coach that will turn out a group and convince them that they have something to overcome because the team didn't make the Final Four last year, even though many of them weren't actually on that
right.
team.
A lot of them are freshmen, but they understand it's for the brand of Duke.
Yeah.
For the brand of, honestly, Nike.
Absolutely, yes. With the way Nike and Duke are intertwined, and they know what it means to Duke to make a Final Four. They know the legacy. When they commit to school there, they know what that means. So I have Duke going out of that region. I think Villanova is going to come out and win the whole thing. I'm
not even going to argue with you on that.
They're going to be a completely different brand. This is not going to be the Villanova brand. We will probably not know any of the players on the team, but it's going to be some young stars that are going to be able to do it for the Wildcats. And even years. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see a Virginia repeat simply because I love that program and just the way that it ticks. That's such a good program to not only attend just academically, but the athletics, they've always been undervalued, whether it's basketball, football.
Well, basketball, they're not in the Power 5. Football is FCS. It's cool to see a school like that be able to reach that national stage and have that success, especially since they are such a huge basketball brand.
Yeah, absolutely.
And kind of moving into our final block, we only have a little bit of time left, but obviously we're on the campus of the University of Iowa, so we might as well talk about the Hawkeyes. We think we have an exciting year coming next year. I think even though Tyler Cook is leaving, we lose Tyler Cook, he's headed to the league. Nick Baer graduating. Macy Daly is going to transfer after this year. But the Hawkeyes are still returning over 1,900 points. They've got a big chunk of the offense back. Bohannon returning to run the point. Can this be an exciting year for the Hawkeyes?
Ben, I don't even know what to say at this point because when I came here my freshman year, I said this year for Iowa basketball is going to be something. I'm so excited for what's in store. Iowa doesn't make the tournament. I then tempered all expectations. I said Iowa could maybe make the NIT this year. I'm excited. Iowa gets a 10 seed, knocks off Cincinnati, who everyone had pushed through, including myself. I had Cincy over Iowa. And then they gave Tennessee, who was once the number 1 team in the country for multiple weeks, a run for their money, took them to overtime, ultimately lost. I just don't know what to think of this team.
Looking ahead to the future for the Hawkeyes, do you think this is a team that can get through the Sweet 16 in the future?
I mean, it just worries me. The past 5 or so years, Iowa just seems to peak at the wrong time with about 7-8 games left in the regular season. We saw it the Utah year where, hey, this team could get a 1 or a 2 seed. They lose at home to Penn State. They fall out of the Big Ten tournament early, and they fall all the way down to the 7 line. Similar thing happened this year. Iowa could even reach a 4 or a 5 seed. lose on the road to Ohio State, get smashed by Wisconsin on the road, and it's just like they can't beat these big teams. The committee recognizes this, falls down to the 10 line. I'm scared for what that could happen this year, especially now that they've converted to the 20-game Big Ten schedule. It takes a grueling on teams. A 5-loss team is probably going to win the Big Ten. Just getting to that true upper elite, you have to be able to win 15, 16 games in this regular season. I think Iowa is still between the 10 and the 13 range. This year, I believe they went 10-10 in the Big Ten. A little bit of alliteration there for you, but I think Iowa can get to that 11 or 12 spot, maybe snag a 6 seed. I think 3 is a bit in the clouds for me looking at that, but they're going to have the amazing non-conference that they did last year, where they just did not lose a game. Getting that win over Iowa State is going to be crucial.
I think for the Hawkeyes, it really all comes down to Joe Wieskamp and seeing what he's able to do. As we wrap up here, if you had to pick one seed line that you think the Hawkeyes can reach to, what do you think?
3, I think, is a bit too much pie in the sky. I think their ceiling is a 4, and then that would be amazing. I mean, looking back at the state of Iowa basketball 2 years ago, people were calling for Fran's head, and it made some sense. I mean, other than the fact that Pat McCaffrey and Connor McCaffrey were coming soon, what was the rationale to keep him around? He could not win. He had the same amount of NCAA tournament wins as he did in the Big Ten tournament. He's now turned it around, got one more in each of those, made an NCAA tournament appearance and beat Cincinnati, showed a lot of promise against Tennessee, and they're returning a lot of guys. The expectation, the floor has to be make the tournament. Whether it's the first 4 or the final 4, I don't care, but they have to make the tournament. I think Iowa can certainly do some damage. It starts here in the offseason.
Well, that's all the time we have on College Hoops Central. Wrapping up the season, it was a great one, a very exciting college basketball season. Virginia, the national champion. For KRUI Sports, this is 89.7. I'm Ben. I was here with Chase. That's all we got.